There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a house when a father has just told his daughter in front of a stranger exactly what he thinks she is worth. It is not loud. Nobody shouts. The silence just sits there afterward, heavier than any argument could have been. Wyoming, 1884. Clara Bennett was 26 years old, unmarried, and had spent the last 9 years running her father's cattle operation while he drank away the profits in town. She could read a brand from 200 yards. She could deliver a breech calf with her bare hands in the middle of a blizzard. She could balance the ledger better than the bank clerk who kept it. None of that mattered to Silas Bennett, who stood on his own porch that morning and told a visiting rancher named Thaddeus Cole that his daughter was, in his exact words, worthless as a wife, but she'll do fine keeping your house clean if the price is right. Clara stood 10 feet away, holding a bucket of well water, and she did not drop it. She had learned a long time ago that dropping things in front of her father only gave him something else to complain about. I want to stop here for just a moment. This story has found listeners in Brazil, in Nigeria, in India, in the Philippines, in Mexico, in South Africa, in places I never imagined a quiet story about a Wyoming ranch would ever reach. And if you are one of them watching tonight, hearing this story for the first time, this channel is still young. We are just getting started. If a story like Clara's has found a place in your heart, hit subscribe before you go anywhere. It helps more than you know, and it means we get to keep bringing you nights like this one. Now, let's get back, because Clara was about to find out exactly what her father had already promised away. Thaddeus Cole was 53, twice widowed, and owned more land than anyone in 3 counties. He did not want a partner. He wanted someone to run his house and stay quiet about it, and Silas Bennett had told him he had exactly the woman for the job, in exchange for enough money to clear the debt he owed the Cheyenne Bank and buy himself a few more years of whiskey. Clara had heard the arrangement discussed twice already, always when her father assumed she was out at the barn. The wedding was set for the first week of October, 6 weeks away. She had not been asked. She had been informed, the way a man informs a buyer that a heifer is ready for sale. That same week, a drifter named Elias Merrow rode onto the Bennett spread, looking for 2 weeks of work before winter closed the passes. He was 31, quiet, with a scar along his left forearm from a rope burn that had gone wrong years before. And he had the kind of stillness in him that came from a man who had buried more than he talked about. He had lost his wife and their unborn child to fever in Nebraska 4 years earlier, and since then he had not stayed anywhere long enough to let anyone matter to him again. Silas hired him for fence work and forgot about him within the hour. Clara did not forget about him. She noticed, on his second day, that he fixed a gate hinge nobody had asked him to touch, simply because it was broken and he could not stand to leave it that way. "You didn't have to do that," she told him. "No," he said. "But it bothered me, watching it hang crooked. It was such a small thing." She thought about it for the rest of the day anyway. Elias was not the kind of man who talked easily about himself, and Clara was not the kind of woman who pried, so what she learned about him in those first days came sideways, in fragments. She learned he had ridden through 4 territories in as many years, never staying past a season, always finding a reason to move on before anyone could ask why a man that steady never settled anywhere. She learned he read whenever he had a spare hour, worn paperback novels he kept wrapped in oilcloth against the weather. She learned he had a habit of checking on the horses last thing before he turned in, even the horses that were not his to look after, because he said an animal left uneasy overnight was an animal that would not be right come morning. None of it explained the stillness in him, not fully, but it painted enough of the shape of a man who had once had a life he loved and had lost it, and who had been careful ever since not to build anything he could lose again. Over the following 2 weeks, Clara and Elias worked the same stretch of fence line most mornings, and something quiet built between them, the kind of thing that does not announce itself with declarations, only with the accumulation of small honesties. She told him about the ledger she kept in her own hand because her father could not be trusted with numbers. He told her once, in a voice that did not ask for pity, about the fever that took Mary and the son, who never drew a breath. Neither of them reached for the other. Neither of them needed to. The knowing was enough. This is the fourth story on this channel. If you like stories like Clara's, subscribe and leave a like to help the channel grow. Leave a comment and tell me, has anyone in your own life ever told you what you were worth, out loud, as if it were a fact instead of an opinion? I like knowing these stories travel to every corner of the world, and I like knowing which parts of them land the hardest. Now let's get back, because October was getting closer, and Clara had not told anyone that she had started counting the days for a different reason than her father thought. The debt Silas owed was real, and it was the kind of real that could ruin a family in 1884 Wyoming without a second thought. Open-range cattle operations across the territory had been gutted 2 winters earlier by the same brutal cold that devastated herds from Montana down through Colorado. A die-off ranchers still called the hardest winter anyone alive had seen, and the Bennett outfit had never recovered its numbers. Banks in cattle country had grown merciless about calling in loans on operations that looked shaky, and Cheyenne National had already sent 2 letters warning that they would foreclose on the home quarter section if the balance was not settled by the new year. Silas had found a solution that cost him nothing and cost his daughter everything. Clara understood the debt. She had drawn up the figures herself more than once, quietly hoping her father might look at them and choose differently. He never did. What she could not accept was that the solution required her to spend the rest of her life in a house with a man who wanted a housekeeper, arranged like a sale between men who had never once asked what she wanted for herself. She confronted her father on a Sunday evening, the ledger open on the kitchen table between them. "I built half of what this ranch is worth with my own hands," she said, "and you're selling me to pay for what you drank." "Watch your mouth," Silas said. "I'm doing you a favor nobody else would. You're 26, Clara. Nobody's lining up." "Someone might," she said, "if you ever let anyone see me as more than a debt you owe." He laughed at that, short and without warmth, and told her the wedding stood as planned, because Thaddeus Cole had already paid half the sum in advance, and a Bennett did not go back on a deal once the money changed hands. Clara left the kitchen with her hands shaking, and she walked straight out to the barn, where Elias was still finishing the evening feed. She did not mean to tell him. It came out anyway, the whole arrangement, the debt, the wedding date, the word worthless her father had used on his own porch, as though it were simply a fact about her. Elias listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he set down the feed bucket and said the only thing that came to him honestly. "He's wrong. You don't have to say that." "I'm not saying it to be kind," Elias said. "I've watched you run this place for 2 weeks straight, while your father slept off whiskey in the middle of the afternoon. I've never met a man who could do what you do, let alone a woman nobody bothered to notice was doing it. He's wrong, and one day soon, he's going to have to live with knowing it." Clara did not answer right away. She had spent 9 years absorbing her father's verdict on her own worth as though it were simple arithmetic, unarguable. Nobody had ever contradicted it out loud, plainly, without flinching. She turned away so Elias would not see her face, and he let her have the moment without pressing into it, which was its own kind of gentleness. Word of the arranged wedding reached town within days, the way everything did in a county that small, and it reached Thaddeus Cole's own household staff before it reached most of the neighbors. What Silas had not accounted for was that Thaddeus Cole, for all his coldness, had a housekeeper of 30 years named Ruth, who had buried 2 wives of his own choosing and had no patience left for a third arrangement built on a young woman's silence. Ruth rode out to the Bennett place herself, uninvited, and sat with Clara at the kitchen table while Silas was in town. "He does not want a wife," Ruth told her plainly. "He wants what I already do for him, except he thinks a young face will look better doing it, and he thinks a debt gives him the right to decide that without asking you. I have watched 2 women go into that house believing they could change that man. Neither of them did. I am not telling you what to do, Clara Bennett. I am telling you what is true, because nobody else in this county seems willing to. Clara thanked her, and after Ruth left, she sat alone in the kitchen for a long time with the ledger still open in front of her, doing arithmetic that had nothing to do with cattle. The wedding date arrived at the end of the first week of October, cold and clear, with frost already silvering the grass at dawn. Thaddeus Cole rode in with 2 witnesses and a preacher borrowed from the county seat, and Silas Bennett stood on his own porch, looking pleased with himself in a way that made Clara's stomach turn. She met them at the porch steps in her one good dress, and she did not go inside. "I want to say something before anyone signs anything," she said, loud enough for all of them to hear. "My father told Mr. Cole I was worthless as a wife." He said it standing right here, thinking I couldn't hear him, or not caring if I could. I have run this ranch for 9 years. I have kept the books that kept us solvent. I have delivered calves in blizzards while my father slept. I am not worthless, and I will not spend my life proving that to a man who already decided the answer before he met me. For a moment, nobody moved. The preacher shifted uncomfortably by the fence post where he had been standing, clearly wondering whether he had been called out for a wedding or something else entirely. One of the witnesses, a rancher named Otis Grant, who had known Silas Bennett for 20 years, would tell people afterward that he had never in his life seen a woman say something that plain to 2 grown men on her own front porch, and that he had gone home and thought about it for days. Thaddeus Cole's face went the color of old brick. Silas started toward her, a warning in his stride that Clara had learned to read since childhood, and it was Elias who stepped between them, not with a fist, not with a threat, just his own steady presence planted on the porch steps like a fence post that would not move. "She's not signing anything today," Elias said. "Not this way." "This is a family matter," Silas said. "Get off my land." "It stopped being just a family matter the day you sold her worth to settle your own debt," Elias said. "I'll pay it myself before I watch that happen." The silence that followed was different from the one Clara had grown used to. This one had weight, but it was not the weight of shame. Thaddeus Cole, never a man who wanted trouble attached to his name, decided in that moment that a bride who spoke like that in front of witnesses was more trouble than any housekeeper was worth, and he mounted his horse and rode off with his half of the money already spent and no bride to show for it, muttering that Silas Bennett could settle the rest of the debt himself. Silas turned on Clara with real fury then, but Elias spoke again before he could. "I have 4 years of wages saved from drifting jobs across 3 territories," Elias said. "It's enough to clear what's left on that loan. I'll pay it, and in exchange, the home quarter section transfers to Clara's name outright. Not yours, hers." Silas argued for the better part of an hour, but a man drowning in debt does not have much room left to argue from, and by the time the sun dropped low over the ridge, the arrangement was made. Elias rode into Cheyenne 2 days later and settled the balance with the bank himself, and the deed to the home quarter section came back with Clara Bennett's name on it, in ink, plainly hers. Silas did not thank anyone. For a week, he tried a different approach, telling Clara privately that Elias would leave the way every drifter leaves, that a man who had spent 4 years never staying anywhere past a season was not the kind of man who signed his savings over to a woman without expecting something permanent in return, and that she would be a fool to believe otherwise. Clara had heard enough of her father's predictions about her life to know better than to weigh this one seriously, but she noticed, uneasily, that it was the first thing he had said in years that touched a fear she had not admitted to herself. She raised it with Elias directly one evening because she had learned by then that honesty between them was worth more than pride. "My father thinks you'll be gone by spring," she said. "He thinks you paid the debt because it's easier to walk away from a place once you own a piece of it, not harder." Elias did not look away from her. "Your father has been wrong about you for 9 years, he said. "I don't see why tonight should be the night you start trusting his opinion on anything, including me." It was not a grand declaration. It did not need to be. Clara realized, standing there in the cold evening air, that she believed him more completely than she had believed anything her father had ever told her, and that the difference was not in the words themselves, but in the 4 years of steady, unglamorous proof standing behind them. Silas packed a bag within the month and moved to a cousin's place 2 counties over, and Clara did not stop him. What grew between Clara and Elias after that did not happen quickly, and it did not happen because either of them needed rescuing. It happened slowly, over a winter of shared work and small kindnesses, the same way the fence line had first drawn them together, one honest conversation at a time. He never once told her what she was worth, as though it were a gift he was handing down to her. He simply treated her every day as though her worth had never been in question. And after 9 years of the opposite, that steadiness meant more to Clara than any declaration could have. They married the following spring, quietly, in the same kitchen where her father had once called her a debt to be settled. Ruth stood as witness, along with 2 neighbors who had watched the whole county gossip about the broken wedding and had come, in the end, to see the one that actually mattered. 5 years later, the Bennett Ranch, still called that on the county maps, though everyone in the valley now called it the Marrow Place, had become one of the steadiest operations in that stretch of Wyoming. Clara still kept the ledger in her own hand, and Elias still could not stand to leave a broken gate hinge hanging crooked, and their oldest hand joked that between the 2 of them, nothing on that property was ever allowed to stay broken for long. Ruth had long since retired from Thaddeus Cole's household and taken a small cottage in town, and she rode out most Sundays to sit on the Marrow porch with a cup of coffee, having earned, by Clara's own insistence, a permanent place in the family she had helped save. It was Ruth who liked to remind Clara, every so often, that she had ridden out uninvited that October morning, expecting to talk a frightened young woman out of a bad decision, and had instead found someone who had already decided everything on her own and simply needed one more voice in the world confirming she was not imagining the truth of it. The county had changed around them too, the way it does. The worst of the die-off years had passed. The herds had rebuilt slowly across the range, and the bank in Cheyenne that had once threatened foreclosure now sent Clara polite letters twice a year, asking whether she had considered expanding her operation, an irony she never tired of pointing out to Elias over supper. Clara often thought back to the morning her father had stood on that same porch and used the word worthless like it was simple fact. She had built since then a life large enough to prove otherwise many times over, but she had come to understand that the proof was never really the point. The point was that somewhere along a fence line in the last honest autumn of her old life, a quiet man with a scarred forearm had looked at her and simply refused to believe the lie she had been told about herself for 9 years, and had kept refusing it patiently, every single day since. I think about Clara's story sometimes, and I think about how much damage one careless word from the wrong mouth can do, and how much healing one steady person can offer just by treating you the way you deserve to be treated all along. If someone in your life has ever told you what you were worth, as though it were a settled fact, I hope you find your own fence line eventually, your own honest conversation that undoes it. Some of us wait a long time for it. Clara did. It came anyway. Take care of yourselves tonight, wherever in the world you are listening from, and I will see you in the next one.